All right. All right. We'll let you know. Yeah. All right. That's it. Thanks.
What do you think you do?
Okay, so we have a remote guest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then whenever she's talking,
So mute this output at all times.
I'm getting huge feedback from whoever is
But
talking.
so we're trying to project her full screen on.
Yeah, here's what you do. Just go.
Here, you can try.
So keep this muted.
Okay.
I'm gonna just take it all the way down too. Is that screen like to the left or something?
Is anyone able to hear me yet?
It looks like it's the desktop because she made the background. It might be in the display settings, maybe.
Keep talking because I'm presuming you still cannot hear me. The picture on the screen has gone to a red banner, land and community.
So
I don't hear the feedback of my voice anymore.
now that's going to be up there. That's just going to show you everything that the stream sees.
Yeah.
So if you bring her up over there on that screen, you should be able to hear it. So,
No, but the audio, like, how do we get the audio from there? We need the audio out of from the guests.
Assuming no one can continue to hear me. So I will keep talking and perhaps something will click in.
yeah, this audio should be going into the camera. And the camera is the audio is getting the live stream, so that should be picked up here.
I'm seeing a lovely pastoral scene behind the red and community banner.
Yeah. So
That
So
would-
turn on the audio on that computer. Like turn the volume up there.
Oh, okay.
It appears we've been live for over 2 minutes,
Coming out of the speaker.
and I'm still uncertain that everyone can hear me. I can hear two gentlemen talking clearly and some background. But I do not believe that you are hearing me.
We hear you, but not in the whole. Keep talking. Just please keep talking. So we're just trying to. We'll tell you when we can bring you to the whole.
Thank you. I'm running out of observations here. It does look like a beautiful New Hampshire scene. I miss New England. We're having cool conditions today in Western New York after strong storms last night that knocked out cable TV, which is still out here, internet briefly, but had me panic for obvious reasons. And we are seeing very, very little turning of color yet, but we have summer weather. It was in the 80s yesterday. It was what obviously precipitated the strong storms last night. And we're headed into falling temperatures for fall, which I believe comes in sometime tonight. So I'm holding on to today being the last day of summer, even though it doesn't.
You just said you could be present.
Yeah, that's always going to be up there.
The temperature is going to.
Oh, so this is the input.
We've already hit.
What we have upstairs is we have a separate line going out to the board.
Okay.
From the computer. So
I'm seeing that people are coming into the session. I recognize my neighbor who has logged on and sent a chat. And I see that Amanda Littleton is requesting that persons who are calling in can ask questions, and those questions will be answered.
I think it's just like the settings, but also what we tried. I don't even hear it going to the.
Yeah.
That is the stream.
No, on the screen, but I don't see sound.
hear you very clearly
I don't see
now,
sound.
without any.
Just from home.
Yeah.
But not from the
I
stream.
hope
But it's-
eventually, soon, you will also be able
Oh,
to
It's her-
the audio
it's the-
was working initially. Now it seems to be in a better place in terms
If
of
you don't mind if people see,
hearing. But I think it's still a problem.
You will need to be able to control it.
Like, are you talking about video as well? Interact
because we can bring this cable back
and
here.
then
Put her full screen.
other New Hampshire so that
Okay, well,
issues could
then
go.
you won't be able to navigate to control it. Somebody needs to control it. You control it from that. Okay, get the HDMI to here, and you're gonna control the stream from there. Yeah, we did.
This is my one. So we did, yeah.
It appears that Gina is talking to persons there in the room physically. So I am continuing to rattle on mindlessly with options.
All right. Can you, ladies, can one of you try and talk to her, see if she can?
I can hear something. Ladies, can you talk to her? See if she can hear you. That, yeah, I'm hearing clearly. I don't think that you are hearing me.
We can hear you.
Oh, good. Can I stop talking?
Oh, good.
So,
So,
not duplicate.
Well, no, here's the thing.
Can you see us? Or are you looking at the background right now?
So, but now you can't go full screen on there.
We're going to do. We're going. You're not controlling the stream from there. No, we're good. We're good, Eric. Eric, we're good. Eric. Lost you, Eric. X. Good. Good. So. Let's start your stream there. Eric.
What?
2 p.m. It's 2 p.m.
It's 2 p.m. right now. So this
Your
is,
session starts.
I think, so if you want it,
yeah, go on to the board.
just go into the board.
Is there a microphone I can use, or is it better for honor?
You should have this one.
Okay. And can Loren see us? Or
Yes, yeah, you're on that camera.
Wait. All right, we just need to put it there. So, oh, you want to start the stream?
There she is.
Hello.
So if you have to take her off of full screen. Click.
There.
Loren, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, beautiful.
Wonderful.
Wonders of technology.
So you will just control it here.
Yes, that would just be that. So we're good.
I think we'll get started. Thank you all so much for coming in virtually and in person. So just to kick things off, my name is Vinay Hershon. I'm the Community Engagement Director at the Cheshire County Conservation District. We've been working with Radically Rural to organize the land and community track for the past 5 years. So the Cheshire County Conservation District, we work to promote the conservation of our region's natural and agricultural resources. So we're super excited to be here, and we have some great panelists here as well. And for some general housekeeping, bathrooms and water are just located right outside. And the way this session is going to work, because we do have virtual panelists, is it's kind of going to be a question and answer based. And so we're going to start with some really good Q&A, and then last half hour or so, we'll answer some questions in the chat online and in person. And just to speak personally from the Conservation District, we're so excited about this panel. We've been doing work through Cheshire Medical Center, through Monadnock Outdoors, which is a collaborative of different organizations, about 20 throughout our region. And our whole goal is to connect folks with nature. So as part of our work, we're just finalizing an outdoor resource map to connect community members to outdoor spots. And we're also in the works of creating a gear library. So just a shameless plug right now, we are actively, we have a survey going around, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback if you're part of the Monadnock region on different gear and tools that you'd like to see be publicly accessible. So to access that, you can feel free to grab me after the panel, or you can go to tinyurl.com/gear-library. So I think I've done enough talking. So I'm going to hand it over and introduce today's panelists. So in person, we have Seiler, who is an instructor and facilitator at the Venture Out Project based in Florence, Massachusetts. And virtually, we have Loren Penman joining us. She is the Genesee Region Parks Commissioner. And I'm going to hand it over to Anna to just introduce themselves and their work.
Hello, everyone. Can you folks hear me okay? Because it's strange to use a microphone. I'm not used to it. Thank you, Vinay, and thank you, everyone, for joining and virtual. For the folks that are virtual, just to give a little bit of a, auditory description of myself. I'm a white woman, young, red hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt. I use she, her pronouns. And as Vinay said, I'm currently living in Penman, which otherwise known as Western Massachusetts, the Northampton area. I am here on behalf of the Venture Out Project. The Venture Out Project is a nonprofit that is nationwide that seeks to build LGBTQ plus community in the outdoors. We do this in a couple different ways. We offer a number of experiences that queer and trans people can opt into. We have our backcountry wilderness trips, backpacking, canoe camping, whitewater rafting. Recently we've started hosting front country adventures that are more about nature immersion and skill building, and which is at our base camp in southern Vermont, in Genesee land. We also just relaunched our volunteer program, which is our nationwide effort to get a TBOP, that's our acronym, TBOP, to get a TBOP event in a day's drive of any queer or trans person in the US. Those are our front public-facing events. We also offer educational workshops or consulting services, to camps, schools, outdoor retailers, anyone who is looking for a tool belt to help affirm their queer and trans coworkers or community members. That's enough about me. I'd love to hear about more.
Loren, can you hear us all right?
Yes.
You, and the host has unmuted my mic. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and apologize for not being here. Family responsibilities have kept me 6 hours away from you, but I certainly am there in spirit. My name is Loren Penman. I am a white woman with platinum hair. I'm wearing a royal blue shirt and my preferred pronouns are she, her. I'm originally from Connecticut, but I've lived in rural New York State for almost 4 decades now, and I'm a retired educator and one of 3 retired women who created the Autism Nature Trail at Letchworth State Park, a first of its kind experience in deep nature, which is in a very rural area of New York. And since the trail opened last October 1st, we have formed an oversight board and received our 501c3 designation from the IRS, making us a nonprofit corporation. And I currently serve as the vice chair of that board. And in the course of the panel, I hope I'll be able to share with you how the trail came to be and how it's going.
Awesome, thank you both so much. So I'd love to hear from Anna first, and how did you get involved with your work? And what inspired you to get involved, and what really sparked your interest?
I love this question because I love getting to surprise people when I say that I did not grow up outdoorsy in any way, shape, or form. Prior to me getting this job at the Venture Project, I probably spent a week of my life max in a tent. Which I think some people are usually surprised about. Outdoor recreation is something that we see very frequently as, you're raised from childhood, camping, canoeing with family, you have a family camp. There's a certain level of hereditary accessibility to the outdoors that leads somebody to be in outdoor recreation. I did not do any of those things. I grew up in a small town in southern Maine that viewed outdoor careers as a low-skill career path. So farming, camp counseling, anything basically other than professional sports was seen as kind of like a lackluster career path, especially for someone like me, who is white, who has a certain level of economic privilege within my own family. So I did not really see outdoor recreation as a possibility. I never considered it. It actually wasn't until I was 21 in my senior year of college that I, was, college, senior year, it's a lot going on. It was also we were starting to see the trickling effect of the pandemic. I was not in college that long ago. And what that meant for me was that I was really desperate to get out of my house. We were pent up there for a long time. So I got into nature. It was the only place that I could unplug, be myself without judgment of external factors. So I jumped in both feet first. Looking back on that, I think I did that kind of haphazardly. I would go on very long hikes with very little water and tennis sneakers because I didn't have that education growing up of how to be safe in the outdoors and how to be comfortable. That being said, fast forward 3 years now, I'm leading a whole slew of outdoor trips across the country, from backpacking to whitewater rafting to day hikes for queer youth, and I owe all of that to the Venture Project. I like to think that I'm kind of a living model of our mission because thanks to the accessible education, mentorship, equipment, patience, and representation that the Venture Project provided to me when I was hired for marketing and social media skills, not my ability to set up a tent, I fully embodied what we stand for and what we continue to work towards internally.
Then I do me a favor and repeat the question so that I'm sure that I'm on the right. It goes slowly. The back's a little much.
Yeah, of course. How did you first get involved in your work? What inspired you to get involved and really sparked your interest in this field?
Okay. This is quite a story. I was engaged in a casual conversation with a neighbor years ago, and she told me about the obvious calming effect that Letchworth State Park here in Western New York had on her autistic 7-year-old grandson, who was without language and in a state of near constant disruption and agitation, except when he visited this particular park from his home in Albany, New York. And when I shared that story with an acquaintance, Susan, she was struck by the details because she also had an 8-year-old grandson who lived in New York City who had the same response when he came to visit her and they went to Letchworth. So we thought that this was way beyond coincidental and set out on a journey to answer a question: what gives Letchworth State Park this calming effect? And as it turns out, it may be the extremely high concentration of naturally produced negative ions, which, according to researchers like Dr. Michael Penman of Columbia University, is present as a result of moving water and the existence of pine forests. And there's an abundance of both in Letchworth, with the Genesee River, which runs right through it, and pine trees just about everywhere. So our next question became, how do we exploit this natural phenomenon with a specialized trail for a specific population? And how can we attract visitors with autism spectrum disorder and others, and the people who care for them, and make them comfortable to be in this state park? So we knew we had an opportunity to make outdoor recreation inclusive, and that's exactly what we've done. The Autism Nature Trail, or the ANT for short, is located in this stunning state park that has been voted by readers of USA Today as the #1 state park in the country. And although designed specifically for visitors with ASD and other developmental disabilities, we have built it to be welcoming, enjoyable, and appropriate for visitors of all abilities and all ages. It's a 1-mile loop that's ADA compliant in its surface and has 8 interactive stations to develop sensory processing skills and sensory integration. And our mission is to provide safe and high quality outdoor recreation for every individual, every family, every school group, every agency, everybody.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, Loren. And I'd love to just hear a little bit more about how you both engage, because you're working with 2 pretty different communities. And works, it's still that focus on inclusive outdoor recreation, but I'd love to hear just the process that goes into engaging these 2 communities in your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a couple different ways to answer this question. I think there's the direct person-to-person way that we engage at the Venture Out Project by hosting events, by hiring queer and trans people to host our events, and kind of tap that representation from a really organic, naturally occurring way. I was thinking about this question a little bit from a project development / strategic role for folks that maybe are wanting to create more inclusivity in the outdoors, take information from this and go back to their organizations and take it from there. And I'm thinking about, we do this in 3 main ways. We do this with our outreach, we do this with the way that we impact the environment after we do the outreach, and then followed by some repetition. So for me, outreach looks like identifying community needs and desires, as well as barriers to access. These things are frequently, always different depending on where you're talking about. The needs of a queer trans person in Atlanta in the winter is vastly different from the needs of a queer trans person in New England in the winter. And so it's about kind of getting boots on the ground volunteers in those areas to identify what is the need or the want of that specific community, and then building out programs that meet those community needs. We also utilize the internet a lot, which is in itself a barrier to access for many folks, especially in rural areas, the access to internet or technology. What we find is that when we work, in my work specifically, with marginalized group of queer and trans people, is that the internet is kind of seen as a place where people can come together if they feel like maybe they're the only one in their town that identifies that way. They might seek out community in online spaces and build that community virtually, which we've only seen increase with the pandemic, right? It's a great example of that. So we have figured out ways to utilize the internet, and that has proven helpful to us. It's an excellent way to market to our audience. Also, impact perspective, it's really important that we provide consistent experience to our participants. The way that we've the way that we found the most success in doing that is to hire queer and trans people, because we're serving queer and trans people, so that representation is huge. And we also provide training and professional development to our queer and trans staff and instructors, because just because you come out does not mean you download from iCloud, like all of the language around being queer and trans and what every queer and trans person across the country wants. Like, you don't just download that. You have to learn it, and it changes frequently. So providing that repetition of knowledge and education to our staff members is a huge part of creating consistency in our final product. As well as like evaluating systemic challenges that may keep participants from wanting to show up and engage. I'm thinking about the fact that impact looks different for everyone. So for some people, they might think that impact means high levels of engagement, talking a lot, asking a lot of questions, participating. But participating can also just look like being present. We see that a lot in backcountry trips. Sometimes we get queer and trans folks who want to talk about their experience being queer or trans. They want to talk about, what surgeon did you use for your top surgery, or what hormone are you on, or how did you find a therapist when your family didn't approve? There's a lot of active engagement in that way. There's also a lot of folks that show up and they just want to be there and listen and be present, and that's also impact. So for us, it's really important to define what are we considering impact, and how can we achieve those things. And then just repetition. Community is not a one and done, show up, hey, lead a hike, see you next year kind of a thing. It is about building trust and showing up again and again, and supplying, for us, the volunteers in certain areas to be able to build that repetition. We can't be everywhere. We're a small team of 10 people right now, running a nationwide nonprofit. So we really rely on our volunteers to kind of know what their community's wants and needs are.
Anna, I don't think there's any question that you are spot on with you go to your target population. That's exactly what you need to do when you are looking for including everyone in every endeavor. We started obviously with the autism community, and we went straight to the top to Dr. Temple Grandin at Colorado State University, who is arguably best known name in autism circles probably in the world. And she was very specific and gave us several parameters to work within. And the first caution was, don't build a strip mall nature trail, she said, which we thought was an interesting choice of words. She said that we were pressured by people and donors, for example, and users who would want to move our idea closer to urban and suburban populations. And that turned out to be very true. And she said, we had found this spot in deep nature and we needed to stay there. So the other thing that she mentioned to us was about staffing. Like Anna said, you have to get experts in what you're doing. And she said we needed to find program planners who were not only experienced with the autistic community, but who were also extremely comfortable in nature. And she warned us that those might not be easy people to find, but would be the search. And once again, she was absolutely correct. Now, Susan and I found a third collaborator, Gail, who's a retired speech language pathologist, and she convened an incredibly impressive advisory panel, all volunteers, I might add, of speech and language pathologists, occupational and physical therapists, autism experts, special educators in public schools, college and university researchers and practitioners, and parents and grandparents of those with on the spectrum. And we listened to stories. We heard stories about children of who have impaired proprioception. And what I mean is that walking on an uneven trail was problematic at the get-go. Or we heard about children with a hypersensitivity to certain surfaces or touches, and those who had an excessive need for movement, intense actions like like jumping and running and spinning. We heard sometimes conflicting information, like music could be a draw, but noise could be a drawback. We learned the importance of offering challenges, but providing opportunities to opt out of the experience. One thing that Dr. Grandin had said was there's going to be meltdowns, so be sure you have some provision for that. So along the trail, you'll find cuddle cocoons and gliders for soft movement to reassure and to calm our target population. So really, our formal and informal advisors led the design, and as a result, our target population from everywhere flocks now to the trail. And we don't have to do a lot of marketing, although we too depend on online sources. But word of mouth has really kept us busy since open.
Thank you so much, Loren. And it's really just great to hear the level of community engagement that is going into both of your work. And I think too often in any community project, we're not always getting those community voices. So I really loved what you said, Anna, when you said community is not one and done. Because it's not. So it's really just exciting to hear about all the processes that have gone into your programs. And I'm just going to go off script, if that's all right with you guys. I just have a quick question, because you both have kind of mentioned the role the pandemic has played in your work. So I'd just love to hear a little bit more about how has COVID impacted your work and your community engagement?
It's a great question. So it's impacted it in several ways, tangible ways and also emotional ways. We unfortunately had shut down our volunteer project at the beginning of the pandemic to keep our volunteers safe. That has just reopened. Some, 2.5, 3 years. I've lost track of how long we've been in this thing, but we're just now kind of pulling ourselves back together enough to lead these events across the country, get a training set up for our volunteers so that they can prepare for the trails. I think for queer and trans people, and we all hold many intersectionalities with our identities. I think within the queer and trans community, we see many intersectionalities from, BIPOC to Alana identified folks. We see folks with disabilities. We see folks of different ages showing up to come on hikes with us that also identify as queer or trans. So we're not showing up and just kind of working with this one identity. We're meeting these people where they are. And what we're finding is that there is a little bit of a desperation for folks coming out on trips with us that have felt really isolated in their hometown communities. And also, kind of having to hold those identities of folks who care so much about the communities they're in that they will kind of keep themselves indoors and separate from others in order to protect the most vulnerable in our society. And so being able to provide a space where folks can show up and understand that they're cared for has been a real crucial part of coming out of or emerging from this latter part of the pandemic.
In our case, here we have this absolutely stunning state park, quite frankly, in the middle of nowhere, but in the middle of all of our rural communities. But within neighboring towns and villages, there's an already underserved and growing handicapped population that previously had no reason to visit the state park in their backyard. Letchworth is nicknamed the Grand Canyon of the East, and it's not really hyperbole. It's because it's a 550-foot drop into a gorge that's been carved out by the Genesee River over time. And there are more stone steps in this park than you could hike in a week. So why would a family with a member who had any kind of disability even consider that out when the mental picture of it immediately is impediments of rocks and water and ravines. But also a huge park. It's 17 miles long and has 15,000 acres. So we found a dozen attractive acres, relatively flat in the middle of pine trees and near the nature. Important for things like emergencies and nice bathrooms and Wi-Fi and parking. And where we could approach this project as a blank slate, instead of trying to retrofit things already in existence. What we found is inclusion is a mindset. It's not an occasional program. It's not an added piece of pavement to a trail. So the best part of living in a rural environment should be access to nature, right? And but it has to be accessible to everyone. And hopefully that's what we've done in our community to make this very, very real, very accessible to people who live nearby.
Thank you, Lauren. And I love what you just said about inclusion as a mindset and a constant in your work. And so I think you kind of already touched on this a little bit in your answer, Lauren, but I'd love to hear a little more from Anna as to why outdoor inclusivity, is important for rural communities and the community that you serve.
Well, like just speaking from my own experience when I was younger, and I heard a lot of the stigma that was placed on folks living in rural communities in terms of their access, their desires. It made me as a child feel like that wasn't a space for me. And I think that concept of, is this a space for me, is exactly what we're trying to address with the Venture Out project. We want nature to feel, we want that to be a resounding, unquestionable yes, that this is a space for you. And so when I'm thinking about specifically rural communities, queer trans people living in rural communities are, like the rest of the folks in that community, experiencing like a lack of access to certain resources. What I've found is that it is a heightened experience for queer trans people. There's a lack of access to therapy, to doctors who are willing to talk to folks about hormones or surgeries, gender affirming care. There's a lack of conversation, and so to provide a space where the conversation can be had safely and privately in the backcountry, there's rather private space, has made a big difference.
And Lauren, I know you already spoke a bit on this subject. Is there anything you wanted to add about inclusivity in rural communities and the importance of it?
I think one thing that just what Anna said that deserves reiteration is that the services that we think of in terms of any special population, really, when you think of those experts in our case in autism, in hypnosis and treatment, it's always in a city, and our rural populations have to travel there. And now, at least with recreation, and we consider this sort of a three-legged stool in terms of autism. There's a diagnosis, there's that treatment component, but then there's that recreation component that's so important in everyday life for quality of life. And that's what we're able to do. And now the people in the city have to come to us instead of us always going to them, and proving to be okay.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on with just the way that cities are designed a lot more accessibly than some of our rural areas. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about what have been the biggest hurdles and barriers in achieving your organization's goals of inclusivity?
For us at the Venture Out project, the most consistent one has been with LGBTQ youth, because there's a number of bureaucratic lines essentially that keep us from being able to access queer trans youth in need of our service, but also need a legal guardian signature to come on and trip with us. So we have found great success in accessing queer or trans youth that are out, that have supportive families, that have caretakers that want them to be in community with one another. But there are some just like legal barriers that exist with us being able to reach the communities that are most in need, right? So that also plays into rural communities, folks that have access barriers. It's kind of hard to navigate the legal landscape. And there are other things. There's costs, of course, for travel. We provide extensive scholarships. And like internally, we have this saying of like, no one in need of financial assistance will go with that need unmet. We never want finances to be a reason that somebody can't come on a trip with us. So in terms of covering trip tuition, we got it. But there are a number of expenses that come with our trips. You know, folks coming from the West Coast having to fly, having to stay the night before, having to find a ride or rent a car to get up to our base camp. There's a number of logistical things that are also a pretty intense barrier that we're still figuring out.
I completely empathize about some of the barriers of regulations. And, I spent 4 decades as an educator, thought when I retired, my days of dealing with bureaucrats in Albany in the state education department over, and ran into New York City Park. And they're pretty much the same people, except instead of 3-piece suits, they wear polo shirts and khakis. But some of the same of the mindset, and not to say that Parks was not extremely eager for this project to go, but there obviously were rules and regulations that we needed to follow. But more than that, and this is what surprises people, our primary barrier was funding. New York State Parks made it clear from the outset that although the idea of concept was admirable, even desirable, there was no money to design, build, equip, staff, maintain a trail like this from parks or from New York State. And I mean $0. So Susan Gale and I willingly took on the responsibility for fundraising to get the kind of money we needed to do this right. And it was a lot of money. It was a whole lot of money. And it was difficult for a couple of reasons. First of all, Dr. Grandin told us she was not aware of anything like what we were about anywhere in the country. So as we sought donors, we didn't have anything to point to say we want to build an open nature trail like this one in Vermont or Kansas or Oregon. There was nothing to point to. And unlike a college that's putting in a new library or a hospital that's building a wing, we didn't have donor lists of people who like to contribute to things like that. So we really started at ground zero. And it took you from that initial conversation that I started with my neighbor in 2014 until we had enough money to build and open last October 2021. And we're still funding. But when you have a good idea and you present it with passion and sincerity, as I hope that Susan and Gail and I have been doing for nearly a decade, donors do support you. And I'm happy to say that as of today, we have raised privately, that means no municipal, state, or federal funding, $3.5 million. And that certainly was enough to get going. But we want another $250 million in the coffers to be sure we have an endowment that will maintain and protect this trail, making it free and accessible forever. So it's an ongoing barrier.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you so much for sharing that, Loren. And if you wouldn't mind just explaining to the folks online and in person a little bit more about the infrastructure within the trail, that would be great to hear.
Say that one more time.
If you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more about the trail itself and some of the infrastructure, just so we can better understand the way that the trail is laid out, that would be great to hear.
Sure. Again, going with Dr. Grandin's initial parameters, she advised us to create a pre-walk station because some of the people we were attempting to attract would never have been in deep nature. And even more than that, caretakers would be fearful of letting their children, grandchildren, students let loose in a very natural environment. So we did. We constructed a beautiful open, what we call trailhead pavilion, some orientation materials, and from the parking lot to that spot is a cement walkway, very predictable. But then gradually it fades into a stone dust surface, which is very natural looking, but compacts and feels like cement, and is ADA compliant. And the very first station is called the sensory station. It's very open. Some of the choices of landscape material are things like missing white pine. So it looks even more ornamental and almost garden-like instead of being plopped into the middle of a pine forest. And there are a number of shelves that contain objects that we have found somewhere in the park, maybe not specifically on the trail, but you'd be amazed at children who come and pick up an item and say, "What is this?" And it's a pine cone, because where they live in an apartment, there are no pine cones, there's no pine trees outside, and their school may not have pine trees on the grounds. So something very basic like that, an opportunity for staff to orient them and make them feel better about being in nature. And another, that there's a lot of features. I won't hijack this conversation, but one thing that was important was also wayfinding. We didn't want to rely on signage. We wanted it natural. So there are 38 stone markers all along the trail. You really can't go anywhere on the trail without seeing one, either close up or in the distance. They are, we call them vertical. They look like little stone snowmen, just 3 rocks on top of each other with a steel rod through them. It goes below the frost line. We have children who try to tip them over. Not going to happen, not ever. And then each station has an identical 6-foot stone mark, an identical plaque describing in brief words and visual representations what to expect when you go into the station. And the station surface is engineered wood fiber. It's a mulch that is also ADA compliant. So you know as soon as you step onto it, you have left the main trail, but you're in a safe spot because it's a station. There's a number of features like that along the trail, all very, very carefully designed and built.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with all of us. I think it really helps paint a picture of the work that you've been doing there. It's great to hear. And I know we've been throwing around the word inclusivity a lot throughout this panel. So I'd love if you both could just share what does inclusivity in the outdoors mean to you and to the communities that you serve?
I think for me, I think about the necessity to acknowledge systemic historical barriers that play a very live role in keeping queer and trans people from feeling like the outdoors is a space for them. And that's where, I feel like this segues a little bit back into that conversation of intersectionality, people holding multiple identities. And in particular, I'm thinking about the historical aspect of trespass laws of private property, how that kept people from being able to feel safe in any given green space, because there were active repercussions for breaking those laws. I'm also thinking about wage income gaps, about rigid gender norms, about who should be in the outdoors and why. I'm thinking about childcare and accessibility. I'm thinking about, just these expectations that were both legal and also societally driven that have created barriers that we are actively working to dismantle. But yeah, I think that's what comes up for me when it comes to creating equitable outdoor spaces. Loren, I loved what you mentioned just a minute ago about the ways that you maintain nature immersion while also addressing the barrier that might be fear or the fear of the unknown, perhaps, creating that safety net of I know this is new for you for so many reasons. It's not your fault that it's new for you. There's nothing wrong with being a beginner or doing something for the first time. And we are here to set you up with all the tools you need to succeed. So proper signage, accessible ground for wheelchair accessibility, taking all of that into consideration creates this trust within a community that they've been thought of. Because for marginalized identities in particular, I think there is this constant whisper in the wind, I guess, that you're not thought of because you're not the dominant identity of that culture. So not little things, but markers like that are a great way to show that a space, you have been thought of in this space, which means you are welcomed in this space.
Anna, you nailed it, and it does seem like little things, but our engineer who oversaw the build of this tunnel used to call them fussy details, and I think when he started the project, it was with a bit of an annoyance, like all these fussy details, but at the end, he understood, the construction crew understood, and to the point that the guys who built the trail would make suggestions along the way and say, if you think about this, things we hadn't thought of, and I can give you just a small example. One of the stations is called the Playful Path, and it has segments off the main path of different surfaces to try out. Something as simple as sand, or something more complex like log rounds of different heights and widths that take some balance and coordination to master. And we never thought, as we were drawing the drawings, the construction drawings, that as you started down one of these segments, if you didn't like it, you had to either turn around and go back, force yourself to go forward till it was over, or hop off in the weeds. So it was the construction guys, the guys on the ground saying, if we could just put not a 6-foot wide trail, but just a path of stone dust right next to each segment, you could hop off and make your way back to the main trail without being forced to make a tough decision about, I don't like this, now what am I going to do? So, I think just literally to summarize, and Anna said it, you need to make outdoor recreation safe, and that's not only physical, that's psychological and emotional. You have to make it fun, and you have to make it accessible in all ways, whether it's with tools or design or staffing, and you need to make it high quality, and then people will come back again and again.
And I think that's so true. And I think just in our region and the Monadnock region, we could really see a lot of growth with accessible spaces and just outdoor inclusivity in general. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about ways, like if you were to meet an individual or an organization that's just looking to start this work, what advice would you give them in promoting inclusivity and building that within our community?
Yeah, I think this word is rightfully so, really kind of being reiterated in an important way. I think community is the most important part of that. So if you are wanting to take what you're learning here and go back to your organization and implement some sort of inclusive outdoor programming or education for your coworkers, what I like to think about is identify within your own community, because, it is much different from Northampton, and we're an hour apart, let alone Northampton from Los Angeles, from Waco, Texas. So identify in your community, in the communities that you are already serving, what are the needs and wants of those communities, and how do they, if they want to be, how do they want to be challenged? You know, is a hike the right thing for them? Maybe it's rock climbing, maybe it's a picnic in nature or a field day to bring back memories of when you were in middle school, right? Different communities have different desires, and so understanding what your community's desires are play a major role in like participant satisfaction. And some of that can take a little bit of trial and error. We don't get it right every time. But we learn, and one thing I learned in one of the panels yesterday was about falling forward, or failing forward. And we do that. You just have to learn each time you do it. And when I said community at the beginning of this answer, I was thinking specifically about networking. So if you go back to your community, you reevaluate or you evaluate your identities, the areas in which you can best contribute in creating a more equitable and inclusive outdoor space, and you're like, gosh darn it, I hold all of the most privileged identities here. I don't know how to help. I would encourage you to consider networking with other organizations like us at the Venture Out Project, like Loren, to tap into outside resources and kind of utilize folks who are already doing the work to create bridges between the work that they're already doing and the work that you want to be doing. Especially with smaller nonprofits, smaller organizations. Our mission is to immerse into communities, and although bandwidth might be tight at certain times of the year, we're always so excited when folks are wanting to bring what we're doing or what we're hoping for, a more inclusive outdoors, to their regional, local towns.
Absolutely. Anna, you know, we haven't, you and I haven't talked about this, but we could have scripted this together for sure, because this is about finding in your community what's important, what's already there you can build on, and perhaps what's lacking. And partnerships and collaboration are absolutely where it's at. In recent years, our region has been focusing on tourism and economic services. And that tourism actually centers around outdoor recreation. Let's Read It is accustomed to attracting as many as 1 million visitors a year from all over the world. So adding a unique trail like ours was creating an opportunity for into a brand new population of visitors. And I have to say that our partnership with the Perry Central School District, which is a tiny little 1,000-student K through 12 organization, but located contiguous to the park, that partnership is developing in several different ways, beginning with regular field trips for special education students who previously didn't get out of the classroom very often. And the district, very forward-thinking superintendent and Board of Education, has appointed a sensory destination coordinator. Brittany is there to help other schools and agencies, day habs and group homes, just for an example, in our area, as well as assisting families who might be traveling a great distance to the park and to the trail as a destination. And to that end, she is tying in local businesses to be aware of the kind of new population that may be visiting. Example, Perry has one of the maybe the last remaining drive-in theaters, and it's even 2 screens. And the owner's wife is a physical therapist. She totally gets the amp and what we're trying to do. So think about the drive-in as being the only way some families are ever going to see a free-run movie comfortably. For those of the families who can't go to a theater because the lights come down rapidly, that is a trigger. Or the sound can't be controlled, and the shoot 'em up scenes just get way too loud. Or member of the family who likes to talk to the characters on the screen. They throw out a horror movie. Oh, no, don't do that. Don't go there. It's not good. Or who ask questions. You can't do that in a movie theater comfortably. So families don't even try. But a drive-in, light comes down naturally at the end of the evening. The sound is controlled through a box that you put on the side of your car, or now through FM radio channels. You want to talk during the movie, it only affects the people in the car. And if all else fails, and it's a wash, you just throw in the towel, you quietly drive out of the theater without bothering anybody else. So that mentality of taking what you've got. This owner has now built a mining sluice on his property where you buy that dirt and it's hit gems in it, and you pan for gold. And it's an incredible sensory experience because the water flows safe, but it's gentle and it's a huge hit and good for business on top of it. So Britain has developed a curriculum with the staff, the service providers of the district, and is providing training and consulting to local businesses to become ant friendly. And when they've completed the program, they can do to make it more welcoming for a neurodiverse clientele. They get a window cling to display that they are friendly, and visitors then know that there'll be some considerations, maybe a fluorescent license or a toy bin available, or picture menus about what you can order at a restaurant, no background noise, just simple but effective considerations and accommodations that make coming to Perry, New York, in the area, happy experiences, and people come back again and again and again. It's been good.
And thank you so much, Loren. And you probably can't see exactly what I've been doing throughout this panel, but I'm taking notes like crazy just hearing about the work that you both are doing. So I would just love to hear, we've heard a lot about these exciting projects and the work that your organizations are doing. What are you both most proud of in your work?
I feel the most pride when I'm on a trip. I'm co-leading a trip with someone, and we hear directly from participants that they needed it. They needed a trip like that. Because Northampton, Massachusetts demographically is actually very LGBTQ heavy. We have like rainbow crosswalks and stuff. It's very queer friendly. It's easy, even with the work that I do, it's really easy to kind of forget that that's not applicable everywhere in the country, and not every city in the country has a rainbow crosswalk, that's for sure. And so it's really, really rejuvenating. And I feel very grateful when we're in the backcountry, when we're doing a thing when participants are challenging themselves clearly outside their comfort zones, comfortably in their growth zone, we like to say, and acknowledging the fact that what we're offering is not something that they can access every day in their hometown communities, but that they were able to access it with us, not just this once, but hopefully again and again. We've seen really great retention rates with the stuff that we're doing, which is another reason to be prideful of that. Yeah, I would say communicating with participants and seeing the impact that what we're doing firsthand is what they're wanting.
I think I'm as proud of the partnerships that we've developed as I am the actual way that the trail turned out. Then we have a video. I hope that we can show. Was produced by Penman high school students and staff. So here we go again with the partnerships. But I hope it captures for people who will never get to visit the trail what it looks like, what it feels like.
Perfect. Great. Well, thanks so much, Lauren. We're going to just switch screens and show the video. Hopefully.
One second. Sorry, hold on. One more. It's the network.
I think I can kind of cut it off.
Okay.
Yeah, just so you know, Lauren, it's a little glitchy on our end right now. So, but it looks beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. So, Lauren, we weren't able to see the whole video, but we saw a really great little snippet of it, just kind of buffering a little slowly today. But what we can do is we can share the video with any interested panelists afterwards. We can provide them the link to that.
It's also on our website today. It's autismnaturetrail.com, and look for visit the trail before you visit. It's a 3-minute, 17-second video. But right now, Chase Herring, our video editor, somewhere is going hard that it was choppy.
It's beautiful, and I think it's great that it's accessible online so that folks can check it out before they make the drive out to Letchworth. I mean, I think that's amazing. So thank you so much for just sharing a little sneak peek of the work that you've been doing there. It looks absolutely amazing. And I think we're just about to wrap up, but I'd love to just, as our last question, I'd love it if you could just both share what you think others can do, in the audience especially, to make the outdoors more welcoming and inclusive to the communities that you get to work with.
I love that question. It's what we get very often. And just from a interpersonal perspective, I think it's actually just a very subtle shift in language and awareness. So like for example, when we ourselves do welcome circles on a trip, we kind of start off by saying, this is my name is Anna, I use she, her pronouns. We're going to go around in a circle, and I'm going to ask your name and your pronouns. Feel free, if you don't, feel free to share your pronouns. You absolutely don't have to. If you choose not to, we'll just refer to you by your name. So what that's doing actually very subtly is it's providing an option, an out, not an expectation to share pronouns, and it's demonstrating what will be done if you choose not to share your pronouns. Because sometimes people are like, if you want to share your pronouns, share your pronouns. What's unspoken about that is if you don't share your pronouns, I'm just going to assume what pronouns you use based on the way that you look or the way that you're acting. And assumptions don't really feel good. So we try to provide A, what we're doing, and B, why we're doing it, and C, what will happen if you make a decision to not share your pronouns, right? Kind of contribute to that safe space mentality of feeling. Other ways to kind of reevaluate language, just to provide y'all with a jumping off point, right, is instead of using something we address a lot in the backcountry, is that there are many people that menstruate, and rather than saying I have tampons for any women here who are on their period, we say people who menstruate or people with uteruses, because that opens up a door that is typically shut by our culture. And assigns what our bodies go through based on our physical appearance, which is not always accurate to the ways that we would like to be perceived. So just kind of subtly shifting our mindsets from this kind of gender norm binary-based way of thinking to kind of encapsulate the ways there are a multitudes of ways to be a person. There are as many ways as there are people on the planet. And when we kind of slow down and assess the language that we're using in outdoor recreation, so rather than like boys' dorms at a camp and girls' dorms at a camp, like maybe think about why is it necessary that we have separated these genders? What are we trying to solve for by separating these genders? And is there a better way to do that that includes our non-binary or trans or intersex youth? Things like that. There are many, many ways that can be done, which is something that we offer at our Beyond Bathrooms workshop. But that's usually the most accessible thing that I would recommend to folks to take back with them, what they can do specifically for genderqueer, gender diverse folks to make outdoors feel like a little bit more inclusive.
When we talk about outdoor inclusivity, especially when we're fundraising or when we're speaking to the general population, we often refer to the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. Changes to the built environment were mandated, like making a cut in the cement in curbs at a major intersection so that crossing a wheelchair was no longer a barrier to mobility. And if you're old enough to remember, there was a lot of public blaming about this. What a waste for people. We don't have a lot of wheelchairs in our town. But the unanticipated benefit was that think about mothers with strollers, older folks with walkers, cyclists and skateboarders, individuals who were injured and on crutches temporarily, workers with carts, travelers with wheeled luggage, even musicians and artists who were toting big instruments or portfolios and materials. It's known as the curb cut effect. By Harvard University. It means that create circumstances that provide opportunities for a group of underserved people. We most often, everybody wins. And that's the mentality, the mind that Hannah just talked about, that is required to achieve true inclusivity, whether it's outdoors or anywhere else.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank you both for being here today virtually and in person, and just the work that you're both doing to make the outdoors more inclusive space. So I'd like to open it up to the audience for Q&A. And you can also check online. But does anyone have any questions to get us started?
Is there any way that you found to effectively evaluate the program to get feedback from the people that you work with, and then use that information to create programs that meet the greater need?
Yeah, I can go first, Loren, if that's okay.
Go right ahead.
We really rely on a good survey. I mean, it has proved to be one of the more accessible things when it comes to surveying our direct participants. For us, that looks like after a trip, we offer an in-person paper survey and also a follow-up survey that can be a little bit longer or more detailed if folks want to kind of dive into some of their deeper feelings or critique points. Also, we have to have a lot of grants and grants to really work minors and demographic numbers. So even though we would really not like to have to ask any kind of questions that would pin anybody into a corner, I would say we have kind of worked internally to figure out a way to do that. It feels very voluntary, allows for a lot of self-identified write-in options, and asks a lot of open-ended questions. That way folks can articulate exactly what their needs are. Yeah, good old surveys.
We've been doing a lot in this first year with just numbers, data collection. There's something that New York State Parks offers called an access pass. Most state parks, it's a car entrance fee. It's not a per person. You pay at the gate. At Letchworth, it happens to be $2 per car. But if you can demonstrate a recognized disability, and autism is one, there's a number of developmental disabilities that qualify. You can get an individual access pass, which lets you into all state parks for free, as well as everybody in your vehicle. So even if you have a 3-year-old child with autism, you can apply for the access pass. So we've been tracking now. Now there are electronic gates. So you put your access pass up like you would put a credit card up for a $10 payment, and we can get data about the increase, and it is an increase, in the number of access pass users coming into Letchworth Park, and particularly to uh, the entrance closest to the Autism Nature Trail. So that's very valuable feedback for us, just strictly numbers basis. And recently, we've installed a somewhat crude but effective people counter. That's like when you drive over that it's not a wire, it's like a hose on a highway where they count cars. We can get some data about days of the week and times of the day, especially when we don't have staff there, since it's not staffed 24/7, and the park is open 365 days a year from dawn till dusk. But in addition, we've got some programmatic kinds of evaluations coming. Two of our consultants and now board members, Dr. Amy Loren and Dr. Jacqueline Feedy of the University of Rhode Island, are working on a program evaluation for our board members, for staff, our volunteers, and for our visitors. So we'll be able to modify everything from the actual programming that we offer, as well as maybe tweak some of the design to make it absolutely an experience for everyone.
Any other questions?
Hey y'all, I'm Karen Seiler. Thanks so much to the panelists and the moderator. I learned a lot from this today. I work at a local nonprofit called the Harris Center for Conservation Education, and it's a land trust and conservation research and outdoor education center, and we have quite a number of trails. And one thing I'm working on right now is trying to inventory all those trails for accessibility issues. And the goal is never to, can't make every trail accessible, but can we make a trail more accessible, like Loren talked about? So this has been great for some context and tips for my work. But one question I had was, we're trying to get lots of different communities developed. LGBTQ folks, people with different mobility backgrounds, levels of experience in outdoors, BIPOC folks, Native folks. So that's a lot of groups. And that's a challenge worth embarking on. But one thing that we keep coming up against is messaging. What are some things that these communities that we want to reach out to? What are some things that you want to hear? What are some things that you don't want to hear? Like, how do we, I liked your point of feeling forward, but how do we not make mistakes in our initial contexts that are off-putting so that there become kind of hindrances to development of those communities?
You go first.
I can start only because it ties into what I said earlier about the environment needs to be safe physically as well as emotionally and psychologically. That's true as you get your information through also. There has to be that level of trust that is built up from the very beginning. And you do need to listen to some of the hard things, but you mostly have to start with the respectful, non-judgmental part of this whole move. You are trying to include everyone, and so everyone has a voice. And what we learned, though, was listen to the quietest person in the room. The loudest ones always get heard, but you need to draw out the people who want to be there, who come to your focus sessions or informal gathering meetings, but and who are there quietly. You need to hear what they're thinking.
Yeah, I was just to kind of agree with you, Lauren. I think that where you feel like perhaps you can't brainstorm those ideas from a personal perspective, I would encourage networking and kind of hiring folks who might be able to. So whether that's creating kind of an affinity group within your own cohort of folks who share a given identity or are in particular committed to educating themselves on a particular identity, and kind of creating these affinity spaces that can come back and do their own research, come back and report where everyone can brainstorm together, or hiring folks like me or Loren to kind of come to you and provide you that education. That's something, just to get real with y'all, that's something that TBOP is doing right now because we are a predominantly white organization. And although we have great intentionality around hiring outside of that demographic, it's something that we've struggled with. And so we're looking into hiring, BIPOC folks to lead BIPOC workshops for us, because we ourselves, we are doing what we can with the resources that we have. And one of those resources should be hiring within the community you're looking to serve if you can't directly access that yourself. Hope that helps.
Yeah,
Great question.
we have similar challenges, but that's one thing, like the immigration thing, like trying to get more diverse folks in the mix so that we, but yeah, thanks for the tips.
Awesome. Any other questions today? Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you to Anna and Loren just for all the incredible work that you both are doing and for just bringing your wisdom and knowledge to today's panel. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.